Hello and welcome to Control Delete Tutorials. Today we are going to be taking a look at kind of a different video. This one's going to be an introduction to 3D Studio Max interface. It's going to be a brief overview. I'm going to try to hit everything that I can and tell you where some of the things are in case you're new to the software. So let's just begin with that. I'm going to start simply at the top and I'm going to break down the different sections and then go into a little bit further depth with some of those. So very simply, we start off, we have the Max button up here. That's what I call it, but it's basically your file, where your file stuff is. So you have your typical new, open, save, import. Under import we have import. These are non-native files. These are like FBX files, OBJ, 3ds files. Also under import we have merge. So this is where you would merge a couple of Max files together. If you have something in one file, you could bring it into this one. Export. Under export we can export different file types that I just mentioned, FBX, and there's a ton of them here, 3ds, OBJ. Those are some of the normal ones. STL if you're doing any sort of 3D printing. Under save as, whenever we're saving files, something I tell all the students that I work with, that if you're going to save something in 3D Studio Max, do not save over any of your files. If you look at any of the files that I have, let's take a look at this. They're numbered, which means I'm doing an iterative save, which means that I don't save over the file that I'm currently working on. So this is my latest file, you can see by the date and time. But if I'm working on a file and I hit this plus button rather than the save button, the plus button is going to add a digit to whatever the number format that I have set up. It's going to add 1 to it and it's going to save a brand new file. This is really good because if you're saving, 3D software can sometimes be finicky. So let's say your computer just shuts down for some reason and you're working on a file. That file can easily become corrupt and it's lost and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's really a bad feeling when that happens. So doing it this way, you can see that I try to save anytime I'm doing something big or I'm going to try a major change, I'll do a save there. If it's been 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to do another save. You can see in between this I had like an hour and 15 minutes between saves. That's not smart, but what more likely happened here is I got up, ate something, came back, and something like that. But you want to save and save often, and don't save over your old work. That's like the biggest tip I can give anybody. I don't really want to go too in depth into the main toolbar, which this is the main toolbar, because you have your normal like copy and paste things. A lot of these tools and buttons and stuff are located in different areas as well. But this top section here is the main toolbar. So this is where we have our undo, redo. We have our link, which this is for any sort of hierarchy stuff as far as linking things together and creating some sort of parenting where you have a parent object and a child object. The parent drives the child object, so whatever you do to the parent as far as moving, rotating, scaling will happen to the child. Unlinking those linked objects. Space warps, not really going to get into that, binding space warps. Under here we have the selection filter, so if you only want to select certain types of things like geometry, shapes, things like that, that's where that's going to be. Then we're going to have select, move and select, select and move, rotate, and scale. These ones are also set up to work with keyboard shortcuts Q, W, E, and R. These are different types of selection options. So you can select by a list, and there's nothing in my scene right now, so otherwise we'd see this populated with different things. So if you wanted to do something specifically by name, which this is a good time to talk about naming conventions, it's always good to name your objects, especially if you're going to be working with really big scenes. So more about that later. Different types of region selection. So by default you have it set up to this box window selection. So if you ever hear me say window selection, that would be where you click and drag to create this window. Under there you have ones that work with a radial. This one I think is called like fence, because you can kind of select around and close that off, and you'll select whatever is in there. Then you have this like freeform selection, like a lasso tool. And then you have this spray paint thing. Terrible, don't use it. Next to that you have different types of window selections. You can either do a window selection or a crossing selection. By default it's set up to a, I think this is technically crossing because you're crossing through. So what that means is if I have multiple objects that are in my scene that I'm working with, and if I was to do a window selection, anything that is crossing through or within that window selection will be selected. Otherwise, only if I set this to window, only things that are 100% within, like this, will be selected. So that's how that works. Just delete that. Actually, undo, which is Control Z, and I believe Control Y to redo. Typically for those you can always just use these if you want for the shortcuts. Next to that we have move. So we have the ability to move our objects in 3D space, so there we can actually see that update down here. And we're in the top view right now, but so we have move, rotate, and scale. So that's where that's located. Under view this is the coordinate system that you're working off of. So this one is based off of the view that you're in. You also have the one that you will use probably just as much or more than some of these other ones is local. This is based off of the object's coordinate space. So if I had a object that's kind of rotated at a funny angle and I change this to local, we can now see that if we change to local here, we're able to move it along its own axis. So that's what local is. Pretty handy, but we'll set that back to view. View is the default one. Use pivot point center. What that's going to allow us to do is if I have a sphere and let's make another sphere. Actually, let's do shapes that are going to be easier to see this with. I'm just going to do a box. So I'll do two boxes. Okay, so two separate boxes. And if I go to rotate and I have both of these selected, right now it's going to rotate just like the icon kind of shows. Use selection center. So it's creating a center point between the two objects that are selected. Otherwise, if we click and drag this down, the other one that you might see is use pivot point center. So this is actually going to allow us to rotate them based off of their own center points, their own pivot points, sorry. Okay. Manipulator, not really going to worry about that. This I have by default turned off. This, when turned on, there are some options that while in Macs have different shortcuts based on what mode you're in. I don't really like that. I like my shortcuts to be remaining the same, so I just leave this set off. If it's on, you'll see it highlighted blue, and I just shut that off. Here are different snaps. So we have the snaps toggle. I'm going to right click on this. So this allows us to snap to different types, whether it be a vertex, a pivot point, a grid point. So if I turn on grid, you'll see that I can snap to that grid. Or I also have vertex selected in my options here, and our vertices are going to be at the corners there. So shortcut for that is going to be S, so that toggles that on and off. Angle snap toggle, really handy. This allows us to rotate at 5-degree intervals, so we can see that how it's going from 40, 35, 30, and so on. So that's really handy for that. Otherwise, if it's off, you can get any sort of decimal point in there. So that's handy. This is the percent snap toggle. I don't really use this one too often. If I turn this on, well, that one might be yeah. So that one's going to affect our scale. So if you think about move, rotate, scale. The spinner snaps toggle. Spinner is basically any of these up and down arrows. So right now if I was to, let me set this to just 90 so it's at a regular number here. It's gonna, it's on, what's it set to? I don't know what it's currently set to. Okay, so it's only set to snap to 1 if that's turned on. But that's what the spinners are. We don't have to go into that. Create selection set, not really something we need to talk too much about, but if I select these two objects, I can go up here and basically name whatever that selection is. So I can call this 2 boxes, whatever. 2 boxes. Okay, so I have the 2 boxes, and if at any point I'm working in my scene and I need to select something right away, I can create a selection set and make it so I can always get back to those things. Here we have mirror. This allows us to take an object and mirror it over. Align. Align is useful for if I have one object selected, I can align its X, Y, and Z position to the other object. So they're aligned by their pivot points there. Layers don't really need to talk about right now. This ribbon is going to be for the graphite modeling tools, which is more advanced. I'm not going to really get into that. Curve editor. This is animation related. Again, not something we're getting into. Schematic view. Again, advanced thing. Don't need to get into that now. The material editor, the shortcut for that is going to be M. So if I press M, that's going to bring up the compact material editor. This is where we can create different sort of materials and textures to put on our objects. Next to that we have the render setup. This is where we have all of our options for rendering out videos or single images and how big they are, stuff like that. The render frame window, normally if I rendered something it would be seen in here. If I closed it and I wanted to see what was in there again, I could just reopen that up without having to re-render whatever the object was in the image. And then render production would just be to render based on whatever scene I have active. You can tell which viewport I have active based on this kind of yellow, beige, gold box that's around here. It'll highlight whatever viewport I'm in. If I hit render, I'll render whatever's in there. Render just means to create an image. So that's the main toolbar. That's going to be the biggest part of anything that we talk about. So again, the next part of the interface is the viewports. So we have different viewports here and we can kind of snap through them. Typically if you see my tutorials, I'm working in one viewport. So it's going to typically be this bottom right one, and kind of jump around here a little bit, but basically I will usually work in a maximized viewport. So just to talk about the viewports, if you like the 4 layout, stick with that. That works for you, great. For me, I want to see my stuff nice and big just because my vision's not as great as it used to be, so this makes it a lot easier for me. Plus, I just like being really up close to the objects while I'm working with them. If I need to go into top view, I can hit T, and I can see here it says top. If I hit L, that'll take me into my left view, which is a side view. If I hit F, I'll go into my front view. Those are the main views that I work in. If I need any other views, I can hit V, which will bring up my viewports list, and I can see that I've got my front, my back, top, bottom, left, right, perspective, isometric, which doesn't have any perspective to it, and camera view, which I don't currently have any cameras, so don't have to worry about that one. But that allows me to see my different views. Next to here in the viewport we have, this is our shading type, the way our viewport shows up. So I'm going to hit P to go back into perspective, and currently we're in what they call a realistic view. So what happens in realistic view is we get some shadows that kind of show up. I find those to get annoying. If I click on here, I can just go to shaded. Shaded will allow me to work, and it's got shading to it, but it doesn't have shadows, and I don't find the shadows to be very appealing. One of the shortcuts that we have here for the different viewports is F3 and F4. Now what F4 does is it's actually turning on the wireframe here. So our wireframe is going to be orange for this object. I can turn it off there, and I can turn it back on. So it's really kind of hard to notice it, probably in the recording as well. If I hit F3 though, I'm going to go into an unshaded wireframe view. So this allows me to see my boxes in just the wireframe view. And if I hit F4 whenever I'm just in wireframe view, nothing's going to happen. I have to hit F3 to go into a shaded view, and F4 will allow me to see the wireframe. Let me, I'm going to make a teapot here, because it'll be easier to see the difference with wireframe on and off based on this. And so what we're seeing here are polygons that make up this 3D object. We have faces, which are these sections here. So a face is a polygon, same idea. We have edges, and we have vertices, which are where the edges come together. And those are the basic parts of any of the objects we're looking at. Don't want to get too much into that right now. So on the right we have, one other thing here in the viewports. You may see me do this from time to time in a video. So if I right click, I'm going to bring up what's called the quad menu. And the quad menu is kind of a quick way to get to certain things. You can get to move, rotate, and scale. Cloning, so if I wanted to make a duplicate of this object, I can clone. Other things I can do is get into object properties, which is what you're going to see me do a lot, which brings up this menu, which has a lot of stuff in it as well. And if you ever hear me say something about going to the quad menu and I don't say right click, to get to the quad menu you have to right click. It's called the quad menu because it normally can bring up to 4 different sections here. So we can see we have one section here which is under display, one that's under transform. If I hold control and I right click, I'm going to get some different object options, and if I hold alt and right click, now we can see that I get 4 different options: set, coordinates, transform, pose. And depending on even whatever I'm working in, alright, what's going on? Oh, scared me for a second. I was going to lose everything, which does happen. But depending on what I'm even working in, depends on what's going to show up in this quad menu. But typically, if I'm not really working on anything, I'm not in any sort of sub-object or anything like that, if I right click, I'm going to by default get hide and freeze selection. Now I've got these added to it where I can see unfreeze by hit, name, and all that, but typically you're just going to see freeze and unfreeze all, and then you'll see your hide options up here. So those are different display options. And then one other thing real quick is we have this wheel up here, and I don't particularly like this because it sort of lies to you. Right now I'm in a perspective view, and if you look at the wheel, it's going to be kind of hard to see because I have mine small. Normally I have it shut off, but I want you to see this. We have ability to go to the top. And if I click this, it looks like we're in a top view, but we're actually in a perspective view. If I was in a real top view, I wouldn't be able to see the side of this object, because this top view is actually, like I said, lying to us. If I hit T to go into top view, I've lost my perspective. This is what's called an orthographic view. There's no perspective. I don't see the box shrinking as it goes away from my field of vision. So if I go into perspective, I can now see that. So this, like I said, is lying to us. And so I can go to a left, but I'm also in perspective still, and I can see that. So this can be somewhat tricky to kind of to use. You have to understand how it's used. Now if I hit T and I go into an orthographic view and I look at this from a different direction, now I'm actually in the right view. I'm actually in the back view. That's because I started in an orthographic view. If I hit P, I'm going to remain in the perspective view, but I can look at this thing from the left, but it's still a perspective. One other thing is I've been kind of moving around here and haven't really explained how I'm kind of doing that, what shortcuts I'm using. So real quickly, to get around this viewport, I can hold Alt middle mouse click, which will allow me to rotate around my objects. I'm just rotating the camera around here. I'm not actually rotating the objects. If I hit Control Alt and middle mouse click, I can zoom in and out. And if I just middle mouse click, I'll pan. So Alt middle mouse click for rotate, middle mouse click by itself to pan, and Control Alt middle mouse click to zoom in and out. I can also roll the mouse wheel to move the field of view, which also looks like zooming, but it's slightly different, but it works for that. Alright, so enough about the viewport. I've covered pretty much everything that I want to say about it. I'm going to move over into the command panel over here. Control panel? Command panel. I think it's command panel. My brain's getting junk. I'm recording this at 1:43 in the morning, so always the best time to do your recordings. So over in the command panel, I'm going to call it command because I believe that's what it is. Hey, look, command panel. That's right, sort of. We've got a number of different tabs, and we've got a number of different sub-tabs of the main tabs. So the tabs that I have are Create. This is where anything is that I want to create from. Modify. This is where we can modify any of the created objects. Hierarchy, which there's a lot here. You can get into some rigging stuff here. Rigging is just the name for creating, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. It's mostly for animation purposes though, when you get into this IK and link info. But we can change where some pivot points, we can mess with our different parenting things. That's what hierarchy would be for. Motion, a lot of animation controls are going to be in here. Nothing is going to be in here right now because nothing's selected, but that's a little more advanced. Display is the overall display, so if we want to hide geometry, all geometry in the scene, I can hide them here or unhide. So if I have something that I don't want to see, I can just shut those off here as well. And this is also where we can get to hide, unhide, freeze, unfreeze objects. Freeze just means that the objects aren't selected or aren't able to be selected. And then utilities. This is also a little more advanced, but this is where we get some other options available to us. So under Create, by default we're under the Geometry sub-tab of the Create tab. And underneath here even is a drop-down for different types of geometry primitives. So we have standard ones, which are the ones that I typically use. So these are our boxes, cones, which I can click and drag. I release, and I can create my cone there. And it takes a little while to get used to making some of this stuff. Different types of spheres, cylinders, tubes, torus, which is kind of like a donut, pyramids, teapot, which always seems funny to people, and then a plane. So those are our basic or standard primitive objects. I'm not really going to get into all the other ones right now. Something you can mess around with. Shapes are basically, you can think of them as 2D objects. If I draw this triangle out here, hit T to go in the top view, we can see that triangle. And this triangle is flat, doesn't have any shading or anything applied to it. And these are really things that I get into in other videos, just kind of showing where those are. So for creating lights, cameras, helpers are kind of extra objects, tape measure, things like that for that. Space warps, these have to do with creating any sort of particles, dynamics, things like that. And then systems, this is where we have things like bones, biped rigs, things like that. And that's the very basics there. Moving down, we have some of our animation controls. We have our time slider, so if we had animation in here, we'd be able to set keys and things using the time slider and some of the controls here. So here we always have some information that will show up. Right now it says nothing is selected. If I select it, it says one object is selected. Click and drag to select and move objects. So right now I'm in move, so it says that I can click and drag to move. If I was in rotate, it would tell me click and drag to select and rotate. So it gives you some information here. Let's see, we'll move kind of along. This gives us an idea of our X, Y, and Z position, rotation, scale, things of that nature. So it tells me in the X, which is my movement from left to right, I can see where my object is based on the X coordinate, the Y coordinate, which is going to be away or toward us based on this point of view, and then the Z direction, which is going to be up and down. Now this will get very confusing because if you work in Maya, Y is actually up and down and Z is your depth. Set key is just for setting keys for animation. So typically I work in auto key to where I don't have to hit this, but I could go to frame 100, move this over, and it's automatically going to create a key at this new position. So if I drag my slider here, it's going to move between those two keys from the one it started at to the one I move to. And I turn off auto key when I'm done doing any animation. Skipping over, I've got some playback controls here, so I can play the animation that I had created, and it'll just continue to loop through there. I can step through the frames one at a time. Shortcut for this is going to be the less than, greater than symbols. Or I can go to the start, go to the end. I can also zoom in and out of my viewport, so in case shortcuts are not my friend and I don't want to use those, I can zoom there. This will let me zoom all of the views at one time. I got zoom extents selected, which means it's going to zoom in on whatever is selected. If I hit Z, it's going to do the same thing. And then there's zoom extents all selected, which is going to do it in all views. So I'm going to go back to there. Time configuration. This is where I can set the end frame. So if I want to have more frames for my animation, I can do that. And that's where I'll set most of this. Field of view. This is what I was talking about for rolling the mouse wheel. Is more like the field of view rather than zooming in or out. Then we have pan, which is a shortcut for that, was just the middle mouse click. Orbit. So this will allow me to rotate my camera around my objects. That was the alt middle mouse click and drag to also do that, so if we don't want to use this. And then my maximize, minimize viewport. So if I go to any of my views here, I can just continue to work this way if I want. And that's basically it for the main interface, without getting into too much detail into some of the stuff, but I just wanted to have an introductory to the 3ds Max user interface, so in case I say something in one of my videos, somebody could refer back to this and kind of see where some things are. If you'd like, I could do another video where I just talk about different modifiers. I think that would be a really good one to do. And so I'll probably do that in the future, but I want to thank you for liking, subscribing, following, things like that. I really appreciate all the nice things you guys say in comments. And if you have any suggestions, please check out the comment section and leave us a comment. We do have an Instagram account, so if you want to do @Control-Alt-Delete-Tutorials on Instagram, you can check us out there. If you leave me some messages there, it's really nice because I can see those a lot easier. I don't get a ton of YouTube comments, but sometimes the comments are just saying, you know, thank you, whereas on Instagram I might get the thank you, but it's easier to see because not as many people post there, and then it is new, so definitely check that out, and send me messages, let me know what you want to see in the future, and yeah, thanks for watching.